The sun had just begun to rise over the vast African savanna, painting the horizon with shades of gold and rust. Ranger McKanza drove slowly along the dusty trail, his jeep rattling through the quiet morning air. Everything felt calm, until something caught his eye far ahead. A small figure stood motionless in the middle of the road. From a distance, it looked like a stray kitten, barely visible through the thin mist that hovered above the ground. But something about it felt wrong. McKanza eased off the accelerator, his instincts sharpening. Years of experience had taught him that silence in the wild was rarely peaceful. It was a warning. As he rolled closer, the shape became clearer, and his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a kitten. It was a lion cub. Alone. Frail. Trembling. Its coat was dusty and matted, its ribs faintly visible under the thin layer of fur. The cub's large eyes reflected both fear and confusion, and when it let out a weak cry, the sound tore straight through McKanza's chest. He instantly stopped the jeep, cutting the engine. The sudden stillness of the savanna pressed around him like a weight. Something wasn't right. A lion cub never wandered this far from its mother, not unless something terrible had happened. McKanza scanned the tall grass on both sides of the road, expecting movement. Every rustle of the wind sounded like a whisper of danger. He stayed perfectly still, gripping the steering wheel, his pulse rising. The cub didn't move. It only stared at him, pleading silently as if asking for help, or warning him about something unseen. And in that moment, McKanza knew. This was no ordinary encounter. It was the beginning of something far darker. McKanza slowly opened the jeep door, the creak slicing through the heavy silence. The air was still, filled only with the faint buzz of insects and the cub's weak, broken cries. Every instinct warned him to be cautious. Where there's a cub, there's almost always a lioness nearby. But something in the way the tiny creature stood, trembling, barely able to lift its head, told him it was truly alone. He crouched low, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. "Hey there, little one," he whispered, his voice low and steady, the kind tone he used when calming injured animals. The cub's ears twitched. It didn't run. Instead, it blinked slowly, as if recognizing that the man before it meant no harm. McKanza reached into his pack and unscrewed a water bottle. He poured a small amount into the cap and gently pushed it forward with a stick. The cub hesitated, staring at him with wide, glassy eyes. Then, with a faint whimper, it stepped closer and began to drink. The sight hit McKanza hard. Each desperate lap spoke of days of struggle and loneliness. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. A fragile bond formed between man and wild, bound by survival and trust. But then, the cub suddenly pulled back, letting out a sharp, trembling cry. Its gaze shifted toward the dense green bushes lining the road. Stumbling on weak legs, it tried to move that way, crying louder now, as if trying to show him something hidden in the shadows. And McKanza felt it deep in his gut. The real story was just beginning. The cub's sudden cries sent a chill down McKanza's spine. Its small body trembled as it stumbled toward the wall of thick green bushes, glancing back at him as if begging him to follow. McKanza hesitated for a moment, scanning the horizon. There was no sign of movement, no rustle that suggested a lioness hiding nearby, only the endless savanna stretching out under the heavy, sweltering sun. Still crouched low, he began to follow the cub's desperate path. Every step crunched softly against the dry earth. The air around him buzzed with the sound of distant cicadas, their steady hum blending with the faint whistle of the wind. The atmosphere felt charged, tense, electric, as though the land itself was holding its breath. The cub stopped near a patch of tangled acacia shrubs and let out another weak, aching cry. It pawed at the ground, its claws scraping the dirt, then collapsed, exhausted. McKanza knelt beside it, his eyes scanning the area. Nothing. No tracks. No signs of a struggle. But something inside him whispered that the cub wasn't just lost. It was trying to tell him something. He took a slow breath, his instincts sharpening into focus. Over 2 decades in the wild had taught him that animals sometimes communicate in ways words never could. As he looked at the trembling cub, one thought gripped his mind like a vice. This wasn't just a rescue mission, it was a message from the Savannah itself. By the time McKanza reached the reserve, the little cub was barely conscious. The veterinary team rushed in, working with quiet urgency. They cleaned its wounds, injected fluids, and wrapped it in a warm blanket. Hours passed before the cub finally drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep. McKanza stood nearby, arms crossed, his expression unreadable but his mind racing. He'd seen countless rescues in his 20 years as a ranger, but something about this one gnawed at him. The cub's condition, severe dehydration, exhaustion, and those frantic attempts to lead him somewhere, it didn't add up. A lioness, especially one with maternal instincts as fierce as nature could forge, would never abandon her cub willingly. Not unless she was dead, or driven away. As the sun began to set, McKanza stepped outside, staring toward the endless horizon beyond the reserve fence. The wind carried the faint smell of dust and acacia. That same stretch of road kept pulling at his thoughts. He couldn't shake the image of the cub's desperate eyes pointing him toward the bushes. The next morning, he returned to the exact spot. The world felt eerily quiet, as though the Savannah was waiting for him. He scanned the ground carefully, kneeling where the cub had collapsed. The earth was disturbed, faint impressions in the dust catching the light just enough to tell a story. And then he saw it. Half-buried tire tracks, small but distinct, weaving between the tall grass. They didn't belong to any ranger vehicle. Someone had been there. Recently, McKanza's chest tightened as the truth dawned on him. This wasn't just nature's tragedy, it was human interference. Someone had taken that cub and left it to die. The mystery was no longer about saving one animal. It was about uncovering what humans had done to the wild itself. McKanza spent the night pacing across his small office, the weight of the discovery pressing heavily on his mind. The tire tracks, the abandoned cub, the missing lioness, none of it fit the natural order. If humans were involved, the situation was more dangerous than it seemed. But there was still one fragile hope, the cub's voice. He knew that a lioness could recognize her cub's cry from miles away. It was a sound no predator, no poacher could fake. That instinctive bond between mother and child was stronger than fear itself. And so McKanza crafted a daring plan, one that could either reunite a family or draw in something far worse. Early the next morning, he and his trusted colleague, Ranger Darrell, loaded the Jeep. The cub, now slightly stronger but still frail, nestled in a small cage lined with blankets. Its golden eyes flickered with confusion, unaware of the risk its cries might bring. When they arrived at the dusty road, the same place where McKanza had first seen it, the Savannah was silent again, too silent. Every sound, every movement in the tall grass felt amplified, as if the land itself was watching. McKanza gently placed the cub down in the middle of the road. Its small body trembled. Then, as if on cue, it began to cry, a soft, piercing wail that cut through the still morning air. He and Darrell retreated to the Jeep, binoculars ready, hearts pounding. The waiting had begun, and the Savannah held its breath. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Each second stretched endlessly as McKanza and Darrell watched from the Jeep, their binoculars fixed on the tiny figure in the middle of the road. The cub's cries pierced the still air, soft at first, then louder, more desperate, echoing across the vast plain. The sound drew life back into the Savannah. A gust of wind stirred the tall grass, scattering dust like whispers in the air. McKanza's knuckles whitened around the binoculars. He knew the risk. A crying cub was a beacon to everything that hunted. Then, high above, the first shadow appeared. Vultures. They circled lazily at first, then tighter, lower. McKanza's heartbeat quickened. "Not good," he muttered under his breath. Darrell said nothing. The tension was thick enough to taste. Minutes passed. The cub's cries weakened, its tiny body trembling. And then the sound came. A deep, guttural growl rolled out from the dense bush line. Low, heavy, and unmistakably close. McKanza froze. Every instinct screamed danger. His eyes darted toward the source, his breath shallow. Was it her? The lioness returning for her lost child? Or was something far deadlier answering that call? The truth was about to step out of the shadows. The tall grass exploded with movement. A blur of golden muscle and grace shot out from the thicket. A lioness, fierce and majestic, her amber eyes blazing with purpose. McKanza's heart leapt. For a split second, time stood still. Then she charged forward, not with rage, but with desperate urgency. The cub let out a weak cry, and the lioness answered with a low, trembling moan that carried across the plains. She reached her baby, lowering her great head gently, nuzzling it with trembling care. The cub responded instantly, pressing its tiny face against her chest, purring weakly, its cries fading into quiet relief. McKanza exhaled, realizing he had been holding his breath. The raw, unfiltered beauty of that moment, the reunion of mother and child, washed over him like a silent miracle. Nature, once again, had written its own ending. For a moment, the savannah stood still, silent except for the soft rustle of the wind. The lioness lifted her head and turned toward McKanza. Their eyes met across the distance, hers deep, steady, and calm. It wasn't fear nor threat. It was something purer, gratitude, a silent acknowledgement between two guardians of life. Then, from the shadows of the acacia, movement stirred. One by one, the rest of the pride appeared. 2 lionesses and several older cubs stepping into the golden light, circling protectively around the reunited pair. The air felt sacred, heavy with the unspoken power of family and forgiveness. McKanza watched quietly, emotion tightening his throat. In that fleeting moment, he understood. The true strength of the wild wasn't in its roar, but in its balance, and humanity's greatest duty was to protect it.